Very good evening to all of you. I'm not sure what time it is for all those who are participating, but I think in Russia and in India it is evening. Okay, I'm sorry for the pause because I thought that there might be a translation. So we now go into today's topic. So as you're aware, we are going to discuss the first topic, which is an introduction to Ayurveda. And today we will have two modules. One is the scope of Ayurveda, and the second is the conceptual foundations of Ayurveda. And in all, it will take about 3 hours. We'll complete the first module in 1.5 hours, and the second also in 1.5 hours. And in between, we will have a break of about 10 minutes. So I hope that is clear. So we begin with the first topic, which is the scope of Ayurveda. Actually, when I was thinking about the scope of Ayurveda, I wanted to put this from a global perspective with a contemporary, relevance. So for that reason, I would like to place the scope of Ayurveda within the scope of integrative medicine. Integrative medicine is a new movement that is emerging world over. And I think the scope of Ayurveda makes good sense when we place it in this context. So I don't know, I just want feedback. I hope everybody is aware, those who are attending, about the emergence of integrative medicine worldwide. Yes. So I want to open today's discussion webinar by pointing out that Ayurveda can be considered as an early example, perhaps even the earliest example of integrative approach to healthcare. So I think the past and the present meet at this point, promising a good future. Because when we talk about integrative medicine today, in one sense, we are also traveling back thousands of years ago when the seeds of integrative approach to healthcare were sown in the tradition of Ayurveda. So, the very word Ayurveda itself is very integrative because it does not mean a particular medical system. It actually means the knowledge of life. Ayush means life and Veda means knowledge. So what the word Ayurveda means that where there is life, where there is biodiversity, there the knowledge of Ayurveda will manifest. So in other words, Ayurveda is a universal phenomenon. It's waiting to be discovered. It is an outcome of the interaction of life with the biodiversity around it. It's the outcome of an attempt of life to understand itself. So I think this nomenclature speaks a lot, so I thought I'll explain it a little bit. So we have, other traditional systems of healthcare, medicine world over. We have traditional Chinese medicine, traditional European medicine, traditional African medicine, so on and so forth. But in India, Ayurveda has never been called as traditional Indian medicine. It has always been called as Ayurveda, which translates as life science. So Ayurveda was a very early attempt to bring together on one platform human insights on life sciences. So in that way, it's even much more than simply medicine. So Ayurveda was also a very early attempt to bring together the experience of diverse human cultural experiences under one umbrella. And that's why it always retained the name Ayurveda. And it's actually inappropriate to call it as Indian medicine. So at this point, I just want to make sure that everything is going well. Am I audible? Am I clear to everyone? Is the speed okay? Should I be slower? Or... Okay, thank you. Okay, so this is my opening remark that Ayurveda is integrative. It's been a very early attempt at integrative medicine, and that's why I think there's a lot of scope for Ayurveda today, because as we are trying to integrate diverse approaches of healthcare in modern society globally, Ayurveda serves as a template. It gives valuable experience, insights based on previous experience. And that, I think, is one of the greatest contributions that Ayurveda can make to modern healthcare. It can give a direction and an example of how integrative medicine can be developed to its best potential. So with this combining life experiences, yes, Ayurveda was an attempt to bring together under one platform experiences of life understanding itself. That is why it was called Ayurveda. It's a very broad term. We have Vriksha Ayurveda or plant life science. We have Mriga Ayurveda, animal life science. And we also have human life science, one branch of which is medicine. So with this first point that Ayurveda is an ancient attempt at integrative medicine, I want to highlight how Ayurveda can, propel the integrative medicine movement today. And what is the case for integrating Ayurveda with biomedicine? So, as I was pointing out, Ayurveda was perhaps the first system to really profess an integrative approach to healthcare. I think it wouldn't be wrong to tell that Ayurveda itself is integrative medicine. Two things: that not only Ayurveda professed an integrative approach to medicine, but also a very rational approach to medicine. So this was the necessity because Ayurveda talks about diversity in healthcare practices. And the process of integration was also an attempt to sift out the spurious practices from what was really genuine. So Ayurveda offers a multidimensional approach to integrative medicine. So I think that today we should look at the scope of Ayurveda in terms of how it can contribute to the emerging integrative medicine movement. So I want to also highlight that Ayurveda is compatible with modern biomedicine because it's rooted in a very strong rational approach. Some of the earlier textbooks of Ayurveda, like the Charaka Samhita, for example, talks about the existence of multiple approaches to healthcare and the need to distinguish between what is genuine and what is spurious. And Ayurveda distinguished, in a very early stage of its evolutionary history, rational from what was not so rational. The rational approach called Yukti Vyapashraya as opposed to Daiva Vyapashraya, which had other religious and spiritual elements. But it's important to also realize that while Ayurveda distinguished itself as professing a predominantly rational approach, it did not actually dismiss the other approaches. What Ayurveda has always emphasized is that the rational approach should be the underlying, principle in building up a truly integrative system of approach. But we may have to transcend rationality when it comes to healing, and we need to find a place for everything And that, I think, is also a great advantage of Ayurveda. Its flexibility, openness, but at the same time being extremely rational. And Ayurveda has also declared itself to be a knowledge system. It is not a belief system. So there is a process for validating experience and accepting what is, valid knowledge from what is not. So for these reasons, Ayurveda, again, I'm re-emphasizing that Ayurveda offers a very robust template to develop integrative medical approach. Now, I was pointing out that Ayurveda offers a multidimensional approach to integrative medicine. We will, in the subsequent webinars, go into more details. Today, I aim to give just an overview. And today's discussions will be a little bit general because I think it's very important to set the stage for more rigorous discussions in the future webinars. So there are some principles on which Ayurveda proposes integration. And Ayurveda says that integration has to first happen at the level of the very vision of the medical science. We need to have an integrated approach to deal with the body, mind, and self of the individual. So the foundation of the integrative approach in Ayurveda is to look at the human being as a complete, harmonious coming together of the body, mind, and the self. And you need to integrate these three levels in our clinical practice. So from this stems that we need to integrate rational, religious, and spiritual approaches to healing, because even religious and spiritual approaches, actually influence treatment outcomes. Ayurveda also emphasizes on integrating medical, surgical, diet-based, lifestyle interventions, as well as psychological approaches to healing. So when you really begin to understand how Ayurveda works, I think you will be struck by its multimodal approach to healing. Ayurveda does not believe that one pill or one single intervention can cure disease. Ayurveda always emphasizes that a multi-pronged approach, which is very self-transformatory, that is at the heart of healing. And Ayurveda offers a framework to synthesize and harmonize, multiple approaches to healing in a very meaningful manner. So this is another important element of integration. And when it comes to here in this slide, I'm trying to point out how Ayurveda proposes integrative medicine as different levels. Another level is in the level of pharmacopoeia. Ayurveda, many people think that Ayurveda means vegetarian medicine and only herbal medicines. But Ayurveda believes that every substance, any substance in the universe is a potential medicine. And so we need to integrate herbal, animal, and chemical sources of drugs to make a complete pharmacopoeia. And then Ayurveda also believes, because Ayurveda was one of the earliest medical systems, we'll see that a little later, to have specialized, to have developed clinical specialties. 3,000, at least definitely 3,000 years ago, in Ayurveda, there was a separate textbook for pediatrics, a separate textbook for toxicology, a separate textbook for, ophthalmology, ear, nose, and throat diseases, for surgery, for pediatrics. So Ayurveda had specialized at a very early stage in its evolutionary history. But Ayurveda emphasized that we need to also integrate multiple clinical specialties to create a holistic approach. So I hope this point is taken, that Ayurveda, when you talk about integrative medicine, it's not just, bringing different medical systems together. There's an entire philosophical approach behind integration. And integration has to happen at multiple levels. So at this point, I just need, because, I am speaking to a blank screen. So after a few discussions, I would like to get some feedback. So at this point, I just need to know whether we are all together, that's what I say makes sense, and you're able to hear me clearly. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so here's a little bit of busy slide with a few Sanskrit terms, which just shows, how Ayurveda serves as a template and matrix for integrating multiple approaches to healing. I'll take a little time to explain this. This is more like a graphic representation of what I already explained in the previous slide, and I wanted to just give the feel that those ideas are not just coming from my mind, but they are well codified in our classical texts. And there are sensitive terms, for all these levels. And I'm showing a very simple framework for integration. And Ayurveda actually offers a very complex matrix which can accommodate diverse approaches to healing, and then place it in the right context so that it all makes sense. So what I'm showing here in this slide is only a very simplified version of this template, but I hope it will serve the purpose to get a flavor of how Ayurveda works towards integrative medicine. So you can see these are various levels of integration, and there are clear terminologies and definitions in Ayurvedic texts of what these levels mean. And so you have the spiritual, religious, and rational approaches to healing. And Ayurveda believes that while it's only the rational approach that can be subjected to scientific scrutiny, on which you can have training, Ayurveda accepted long, long ago that you cannot ignore spiritual and religious phenomenon, in the context of healing. Whether you want it or not, spiritual and religious dimensions influence healing. You may call it not rational, but it is real. And for patients, it can create influences and differences in outcomes. So Ayurveda accepted the spiritual and religious dimensions of healing, even as it separated it from the rational core of the practice of medicine. And Ayurveda emphasizes that we need to always bring all these three elements together. So there is tremendous healing potential within the patient, within the person, and his religious, spiritual backgrounds, his belief systems can all play a role in how the healing response is actually stimulated. So even while we use a rational approach, it's very, very important to look at these other two dimensions. And that's why that's on the top, that when we look at a person as a complete individual, give consideration to his belief systems. And then we can marry the rational and what is beyond the rational to create a more humane and holistic system of healing. And when it comes to the rational aspects, then it's again, divided in hierarchical, and not only as hierarchies, but also as network concepts. But for the sake of simplicity, I'm not going to go into all those details in our discussion today. But you can see the next important aspect in Ayurveda is that a disease cannot be treated just with medicine. So just as a rational approach is not sufficient, if you cannot respond to the spiritual and religious impulses of your patient, you cannot reach him completely. In a similar way, you cannot treat just with medicine. Diet and behavior are equally important. And the goal was to completely transform the lifestyle of the patient, and medicine was just one element in this larger, framework of intervention. So we have behavior, diet, and medicine. Medicine is only the third option in Ayurveda. And it's very interesting that Ayurveda went very, very deep into trying to understand diet according to lifestyle. Different lifestyles need different diets. So Ayurveda becomes extremely specialized here. And how do we decide lifestyle of a person? The lifestyle of a person may have to be decided based on his constitution, both mental and physical. So what Ayurveda believes is that inner harmony can happen only with a true understanding of a person. And for this reason, a constitution, the concept of Prakriti or constitution, is the cornerstone of the Ayurvedic approach to healing. When you understand the person that you are treating, then you are able to advise the right kind of behavior, the right kind of lifestyle. And according to the lifestyle that is most suited for an individual, we need to develop a proper diet. So, uh, according to the lifestyle is the diet, and according to the and then comes medicine. And diet is also very elaborately dealt with. Like, Ayurveda has this elaborate discussions on how different diet articles can be combined. There are some combinations of foods that are harmful, some combinations that are beneficial, some items, food items, are suitable for a certain lifestyle. So Ayurveda would never say that this is good or this is bad. I mean, it all depends on the constitution of the individual, his lifestyle, even the changing seasons. And for this reason, I can also state at this point that Ayurveda is also not just the first experiment in integrative medicine, but also perhaps the first experiment in person-centered, personalized medicine. So that is about how diet, behavior, and medicine are integrated in Ayurveda. And it's very important to realize, yes, you can say that each diet is relevant for a particular type of behavior. So your lifestyle determines whether a particular food item might harm you or help you. And so what is good for one person may not be good for another, not just because of constitution, but also because of lifestyle. So in this way, I mean, we'll come back to all this in greater detail as we have a section on food itself. We have also a session on behavior and also on medicine. So we'll explore all these concepts in detail later. But I thought it's really very important to introduce them at the very outset so that we know, the overall focus of our discussions. So, and medicine, according to Ayurveda, should be minimized. I mean, we don't believe that a good medical system should have such an overemphasis on medicine. We say that medicine should supplement diet and behavior and diet, and not diet and behavior and diet supplement medicine. So I think this is one area where modern medicine and Ayurveda are a little bit different in their emphasis. And now even modern medicine is beginning to accept and understand, promote the modification of lifestyle and diet. But the emphasis is primarily still on medicine. It's medicine with behavior and diet. Whereas in Ayurveda, it's behavior and diet with medicine. So medicine, we say, should be used only when it's really, really necessary. And this is a way to actually make the body more resourceful, more stronger, and more self-healing. So promoting the self-healing abilities of the human body is really the focus of Ayurveda. That is why we profess this philosophy. And now let's come to the medicine. So I'm going step by step. We have the spiritual, religious, and rational. Within the rational, we have the behavior, diet, and medicine. And at this point, I also want to highlight the fact that in Ayurveda, by behavior, we mean not just physical, but also the mental. So when we say behavior, vihara, it is related to both the body and the mind. So when the mental attitude is really very important, in Ayurveda, we begin our treatment, or the first step is to correct the thought process of the patient. And without correcting that, you cannot change the behavior. And when the behavior changes, then it's possible. Diet is one aspect of behavior. And then the medicine becomes very minimal, and even very little medicine produces very strong effect. So this is the philosophy. Now, when it comes to medicine, again, Ayurveda is very broad and very inclusive, very integrative, because Ayurveda does not say that a single approach. Some medical systems, I mean, I'm not trying to criticize, but it's just to understand the difference between an integrative approach and a non-integrative approach. So there may be systems like homeopathy, and again I want to highlight, I'm not speaking in a derogatory sense, or naturopathy, which might be overemphasizing certain approaches. You know, in homeopathy, for example, the similia similibus curanter, or the like cures the like, is so much overemphasized, to the extent that other approaches to health healing may get completely sidelined. And in naturopathy, there's so much of an emphasis on uncooked food, natural methods of healing, that other aspects of healing get completely sidelined. But when you come to Ayurveda, Ayurveda says that all of these are correct, but they have their limits. So we can never emphasize one particular approach as the ultimate. It's according to the context of the situation. We may need even surgery. So surgery is also part of Ayurveda. Ayurveda was actually one of the earliest systems also to promote surgery. And Sushruta, the great Ayurvedic surgeon, is even today recognized as the father of surgery, and at least definitely the father of plastic surgery, cosmetic surgery. So when it comes to medicines, Ayurveda says that there are external treatments, internal treatments, surgical treatments, internal medications, and all of them. I didn't show all those complex classifications for the sake of simplicity, that Ayurveda says not just one dosage form, multiple dosage form, multiple methods of external treatment. All of them need to be integrated to give a complete solution to diseases. So here again, we see that in Ayurveda is an integrative approach, not overemphasizing any particular methodology, but trying to balance, find meaning as to which is relevant where. And then when we come to the types of treatments, we have some treatments which are very curative, which we call as Lankana, some others which are very nutritive, which we call as Brahmana, and certain others which are rejuvenative. And again, Ayurveda says that all the three are required. And that is why, again, I want to point out that Ayurveda has an integrative approach. And there are overall two radical approaches. Bio-cleansing is one of the strong strengths of Ayurveda, which is called as Panchakarma, the 5 methods of bio-cleansing. But again, Ayurveda says that in all diseases and in all patients, it's not only not necessary to do bio-cleansing, but sometimes it may also be harmful. So we need to balance the restorative and the more radical bio-cleansing methods. So in a nutshell, looking at this slide, I hope, okay, I turn off the video for better internet. But if you think you need to see me, I can still try. Do you think it's important to have the video also? Okay, so I think it is better. I mean, I just saw a request that to actually, switch on the video, but I think it may not be advisable to switch on the video. It might lead to interference of this webinar due to low bandwidth. So if it's okay for everyone, then we can continue, with the just the audio. Is that okay? Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. Okay, so this was the slide which I hope gave you an idea about how Ayurveda professes an integrative approach to healing. So now let's go on to some more discussions. So I also want to highlight today how Ayurveda is based on biological understanding. I mentioned in the beginning that Ayurveda is all about life science, and so for that reason I thought I should also so this is the second part of the discussion. In the first point, the scope of Ayurveda, I just emphasized how Ayurveda is integrative in its approach, and this is really, I think, the scope of Ayurveda today. I believe that Ayurveda can serve as a template, as a guideline, and as a demonstration how seemingly diverse approaches to healing can be brought together. And I think this is the real challenge today. Western medicine has a reductionistic approach, and therefore it is unable to sometimes accommodate certain diverse aspects of healing. And here I think is where Ayurveda gives us a template and shows how this can be done. The next point that I want to make in our discussion today is about medical, genetics in Ayurveda and certain other fundamental concepts which might enable me to convey to you the idea that Ayurveda is based on sound biology. I mean, biology is the basis of Ayurveda. And it's interesting to know that Ayurveda can be translated as biology in one way. It's an exact translation. So Ayurveda does not mean medicine, but it means biology. Ayus is life. Bios is also life. Logos is study. And Veda is knowledge. So there can be no better terminology to translate Ayurveda than biology. But I think today, biology, while biology is the study of life, life science may be even a better term, because life science is a more exact match to Ayurveda. I'm just typing this out so that, because there are some Sanskrit terms, I thought it might help that if you also saw them is a more exact translation. So life meaning Ayus, and Veda is maybe science, so Ayurveda is life science. So in Ayurveda we find a lot of biological, foundational concepts on which this medical science has been built up, and genetics, medical genetics is discussed and described in very early Ayurvedic textbooks. The Charaka Samhita, I don't know how many of you have heard of Charaka Samhita. Since I cannot get a audible response, I will just note it down. The Charaka Samhita is the earliest textbook on medicine. So in Ayurveda we have Charaka and Sushruta representing the branches of general medicine and surgery. And so Charaka Samhita is the currently available earliest textbook on Ayurveda. And the Charaka Samhita interestingly observes that each part of the human body is represented in the sperm and ovum. In other words, there's a blueprint of the entire body in the reproductive elements of the human body. And Ayurveda says that this genetic coding is organized at 3 levels, and we call it as the Bija Bhaga, and the Bija Bhaga Avayava. If you were to translate these Sanskrit terms, it would mean, the seed, then the part of the seed, and then the part of the seed. So in Ayurveda, with very, very early stage in its evolutionary history, we understood that there's the organization of genetic material is at 3 levels. I am very tempted to compare this to, the chromosome, the DNA, and the genes as we understand today. So even though, the structural mapping of these the genome was never attempted or done. It's very interesting to see that Ayurveda understood about genetics and genetic coding and also proposed certain conceptual frameworks. The purpose of discussing this is I wanted to show also how Ayurveda is compatible with modern biology and modern theories of disease causation, including medical genetics. So it is not difficult to integrate Ayurveda with modern medical knowledge for that reason. And the texts go on to discuss that genetic diseases can be caused by defects of bija, bija bhaga, or bija bhaga avayava. In other words, if you were to translate it, there could be, problems at the chromosomal level or the DNA level or at the level of the gene. And all of these three things. So there are chromosomal anomalies or there are damage to DNA, and there can also be actually problems with the genes. So at these three levels, genetic diseases manifest. And there can be partial or complete damage to certain organs or malformations based on how these genetic material is affected or damaged. And I think this is perhaps the earliest speculations on the genetic basis of diseases. So this we find in the Ayurvedic tradition. And especially today when we are coming to genomic medicine, personalized medicine based on, we have now the emerging concept of pharmacogenomics, how different individuals respond differently to even medicines because of the genetic makeup. I think these ancient concepts in Ayurveda about genetics and health and disease assume great significance. So that's about how medical genetics is there in Ayurveda. Now we can look at another important aspect, which has always been the cornerstone or the foundational pillar of the Ayurvedic conceptual basis, is microbiology. It's fascinating to see in the classical Ayurvedic text, and once again the Charaka Samhita, which classifies invisible organisms. There is a very clear definition of what is a microorganism in the classical Ayurvedic texts. The texts say that some of them cannot be seen, and one of the commentators specifies that those organisms which cannot be seen by the naked eye, they are called as these microorganisms. And Charaka Samhita classifies them into two, the benevolent and the harmful. So this idea that microorganisms are invisible, that's the first concept. And the second thing is that some of them are very harmful and some of them are very beneficial, and that the harmful ones attack and cause diseases, and they thrive on external and internal waste products and other biological fluids in the human body, whereas the beneficial ones actually support life. So I wanted to point this out because today again we are discovered, apart from the human genome, the next important discovery of modern biology, which is influencing medicine, is the microbiome. So these two foundational concepts coincidentally also happen to be at the basis of Ayurveda, the genome and the microbiome. So pathogenic organisms are again broadly classified into parasites and microbes, and the microbes are, as I mentioned, invisible. They are described as without feet, circular or elongated in shape. Many of these microorganisms have been named, and it's really intriguing to even think about how 2,000, 3,000 years ago they could even imagine or even visualize these living forms that are beyond the perception of the human eye. So while it leaves many questions unanswered, there's no denial that these facts have been recorded in the classical Ayurvedic texts. So I want to also point out at this juncture that Perhaps this is the first reference to invisible pathogens in the medical context, and perhaps it's also one of the earliest reference to the human microbiome. Why I say that, because we know today that the microbes that live in our body, or we who live with the microbes definitely outnumber the human cells. So they are innumerable, and in fact, their population is much more than the population of our own cells. And this is also a fact that has been recorded in the classical Ayurvedic texts. So there's a discussion saying how many microbes are there in the human body. And the text says that aparisankhya in Sanskrit, it means you cannot count them. They are uncountable. So the ancient physicians were aware that the human body has benevolent as well as harmful microorganisms inhabiting it, and that these organisms were innumerable and they couldn't be counted. So this is the concept of microbiome. And in Ayurveda, we also, so I will come back to that a little bit later, how microbes cause diseases. But Ayurveda took a slightly different approach than modern medicine when it comes to how to handling these microbes. And I think in this era of antibiotic resistance, this is another great scope. Because Ayurveda has a theory of, eliminating the bacteria from the body without killing them. Because Ayurveda says that there's a way in which you can completely reorganize your body, making it a place that is not livable for these harmful pathogens. And in fact, the Ayurvedic theory is that these pathogens attack us only when our body becomes conducive for them to thrive. And so if we can completely change the internal environment, and then the microbes will just go away. And because in nature, the microbes have a role to play, and it's mostly to decompose something which is already, dysfunctional and deteriorating, and that's what disease is. And this is another area. Ayurveda talks about a lot of even pharmacological approaches to control infections. And maybe in a later discussion, I will talk about even the scientific results of such studies on microbial agents that are not antibiotics. They don't kill the microbes, but they really displace them to their own place. So that's one point. Okay. So after looking at the genome and the microbiome, we will move forward to some other concepts of biology in Ayurveda. So from this idea of microbes also came in Ayurveda the concept of communicable diseases. And this is another area, I think, which is very relevant today because we are having these worldwide epidemics, pandemic proportions. And the latest scare, the Zika virus, which is also threatening the next Olympics. Ayurveda accounted that diseases can be contagious and spread from person to person. The Ayurvedic text also talked about the mechanisms through which disease spreads from one person to the other: close contact, touching body parts, by breath, by dining together, and all these mechanisms are described. And Ayurveda has also advised a lot of preventive measures, by which it says that when there are outbreaks of epidemics, if you can prepare the population, while definitely we need to look for curative treatment, Ayurveda talks about methods to boost the immunity in a natural way, that the overall morbidity and mortality can be greatly reduced. So I wanted to point this out because this is a very unexplored area. There's a lot of pharmacological approach described to prevent communicable diseases, especially as epidemics. I think this is a very fertile area for research in the future. This is also of contemporary relevance because of these rising epidemics. And as I was mentioning a little earlier, Ayurveda was one of the earliest systems to specialize in the field of clinical medicine. So apart from the branches of medicine and surgery, Ayurveda from the beginning said that medicine can be divided in many ways. And one is broadly preventive and curative, and even into three: preventive, promotive, and curative. And then when it comes to the actual practice of medicine, there would be these two branches, medicine and surgery, and then again two branches dealing with the mind and the body, and then the clinical specialties, which in which Ayurveda has very strong traditions of pediatrics, of psychiatry. In Kerala, which is in the south of India, even today, an old tradition of psychiatry, perhaps the only traditional family of psychiatrists in Ayurveda. They are still living. That family is almost dying out. The tradition is almost dying out, but it has still survived into the 21st millennia. And then is a specialty for supraclavicular diseases, which includes dentistry, ear, nose, and throat diseases, and even craniology. The head was considered as a specialty. Perhaps today, what we have as neurologists were in those times called as brain specialists, dealing with just the head. And then we had a branch called reproductive medicine, which is looking at fertility, infertility, and their treatment. Also prevention of genetic diseases. And then geriatrics, looking at old age and old age problems. And today, unfortunately, there's a lot of suspicion that has been generated about the safety of Ayurvedic medicines. But Ayurveda devoted an entire branch just to toxicology. And toxicology, not only of snake bites and other animal sources, but also toxicity from plant sources, as well as artificial substances created by human beings. So today in this world, which is extremely polluted with the artificial chemicals, the industrial waste, and the carbon footprints of human activity, toxicology of Ayurveda is also a very potential and promising field of inquiry. We have done some studies on how Ayurveda can restore the virginity of soil. There is a branch of Vriksha Ayurveda which deals with plant life and the quality of the soil, how Ayurveda can compensate for many of the toxic chemicals that come into our body, but that's another matter for discussion. At the end of our webinar, we have a special session dealing with each of these clinical specialities, where we will actually go into details. And ophthalmology, in Kerala, we have very strong traditions of ophthalmology. In fact, there are Ayurvedic eye specialists with very well-developed hospitals across the state, and many of them are well known even outside India. So ophthalmology is a very developed branch even today in Ayurveda. And then dentistry also developed independently. Even today in India, there are dentists who can practice painless tooth extraction. And then we have also the ear, nose, and throat specialists. And these have been surviving for more than 2,000 years with specialized textbooks and practitioners, and the continuity is simply amazing. So I also want to point out that Ayurveda had a very pragmatic approach to understanding the human body, and Sushruta Samhita emphasized that anatomy must be learned through dissection and not from the texts. And Sushruta gave a very elaborate method on how to dissect dead bodies. They were cleaned and kept in flowing water, and then preserved in a special way using certain plant substances. And the layers of the skin were scraped to reveal the internal organs till the bone was seen. And this is how they tried to map the blood vessels, the tendons, the muscles. And Ayurvedic texts talk about 7 layers of the skin, which is again quite intriguing and fascinating to think that, in that time period with very limited technological tools, the Ayurvedic surgeons were able to demarcate 7 layers of the skin, name them, and describe them. So I just thought I will mention this to show the meticulousness with which Ayurveda is attempting to understand the structure and function of the human body. So coming back to this point that Ayurveda and biomedicine can be integrated because Ayurveda is a knowledge system and not a belief system. So I hope what I discussed so far gives enough proof to show that Ayurveda followed an empirical approach. It's not just a set of beliefs, but a way to understand life and understand life through a process of examination, experimentation, and verification. And therefore it's a knowledge system. And the edifice of Ayurvedic knowledge is built through a process of validating experience. This is called as prema, because Ayurveda believed that all experiences cannot be considered to be true. You need to validate experience, and this is how we have also in Ayurveda some preliminary approaches to research and validation, and later we will also discuss what kind of methods Ayurveda used. But I want to make a general statement at this point by saying that Ayurveda considered observable and verifiable evidence as the basis of knowledge. So this is called as pratyaksha phala. Why is Ayurveda a science? The textbook itself clarifies, is that it's because it's built on observable and verifiable evidence. And it's not just a belief in statements, told by some authoritative people. And so for this reason, because of this rational framework, we can integrate. And the logic of Ayurveda is that every practice is based on a sound theory. Practice is called as vyavahara, and the theory behind that practice is called as a shastra. And behind every theory there will be a principle, or what is called as tattva. So Ayurveda is based on a 3-tier structure: tattva, shastra, and vyavahara, which means the principle, the theory, and the practice. So Ayurveda even says that it's not just theory and practice. There is something even beyond theory, which is the principle, which is beyond even human, articulation. So even human theory, a theory can be improved, but a principle is, unchangeable because it's in nature. So we understand the principles of nature. We create theories, and today's theories can be changed and made better and better. We may have newer theories about the same principle, but the principles do not change. And because the principles do not change, the foundations of Ayurveda also cannot change. But our theories about these principles can change. So Ayurveda is both changing and unchanging at the same time. And based on these theories and principles, we can keep creating newer and newer practices. And so there's so much of scope for innovation. And this is the positive note I want to give when we talk about the scope of Ayurveda. When we say, or when we ask what is the future for the development of Ayurveda, I would like to point out that what we mean by development of Ayurveda would be to, see the principles behind the theories. Maybe there is scope for improvising these theories, expressing these theories in a more effective and more application-oriented manner. We can create new practices according to the needs of our times, and therefore Ayurveda is very progressive in its scope. So this is somewhat a summary of what we are discussing in the. There are a few more slides which we will look into. But before that, I wanted to just recapitulate what we discussed so far. We started off with the point that today integrative medicine is becoming a watchword world over to bring different approaches to healing in one common framework. And Ayurveda is considered to be one of the systems that need to be integrated within this emerging frame of Ayurveda. But I wanted to point out that perhaps Ayurveda is not just one system that needs to be integrated, but it's perhaps the solution itself for integration. And then we looked into why Ayurveda can be the solution for integration because of its integrative framework, which is very broad, very inclusive, and Ayurveda has attempted this throughout the centuries, and so perhaps it should be looked at as a tool for integration and not just an ingredient of integration. The second point was that Ayurveda is based on biology, on life, and we reviewed some of the basic concepts in Ayurveda like genetics, microbiology, then the concept of communicable diseases, and even the meticulous understanding of the human body, which gives us a flavor of what is the biological basis of the Ayurvedic approach. And finally, I wanted to also point out how Ayurveda is very rigorous when it comes to knowledge building and how it has this three-tier structure of Tattva Shastra and Vyavahara, of principle, theory, and practice. So at this point, I want to also let you know that I have kept some time for a little bit of discussion at the end because I felt that it wouldn't make sense for me to be just speaking throughout the whole webinar without giving any scope for a little bit of interaction towards the end. So when I complete the next few slides, we could take a few moments if you have any questions or if you want any clarifications. I think that's really very, very important. So the last 10 to 15 minutes we can use for such a discussion. Do you all agree that we should have a discussion at the end? Okay, thanks. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a few, visual slides. So, are you all able to read this? If you maybe you will need to enlarge this slide to be able to read it. This is talking about the richness of the Ayurvedic textual tradition of codification. Ayurveda was in the beginning an oral tradition, and then over a period of time it got written down and codified in very rigorous manner, in a very complex format of technical writing. And what you're seeing here, I wanted to just show that this is a very long tradition of revision, of editing, of improvisation. Like if you look at the Charaka Samhita, it's not the work of one person. It is like, a modern textbook of medicine which began with one edition. Then you have the second, third, fourth, fifth, 18th, 19th, 20th edition. And the new authors coming and improvising it. And most of the Ayurvedic texts have been developed in that manner. So that shows how Ayurveda has a very evolutionary approach to learning. And this is also important because this means that we can continue this process of evolution today. And so I thought that that should also be understood as a scope for the development of Ayurveda. For example, if you look at the Charaka Samhita, there are at least three major, lines of authors. There may be many more. It was originally the teachings of sage Atreya, and then his disciple codified it. and this was later revised and enlarged by another person called Charaka. Because he made a lot of changes in the text, it came to be known by his name, Charaka. And then there were still others who did, editing, and a major editing was done by another person called VedaPulse. And then there's several others who worked on this text. All of them did not make very big changes. They kept appending new information, so their names were not so much highlighted. So what we have in the form of Charaka Samhita is actually, a contribution of generations, patient addition, deletion, and updation of medical knowledge. So every textbook is in that way rich, chronologically very enlightening. And the Sushruta Samhita also is very similar. The person whose teachings become the core of the book is not the one who did the final writing of the text. It was Sushruta, his disciple, and then it was again revised by Nagarjuna, and then Chandrada worked on it. So you can see again, it's a collective, it's a consensus opinion of many scholars on the subject. So we have similar traditions for the Kashyapa Samhita and the Bela Samhita, which constitute some of the earliest textbooks of Ayurveda. In the next slide, I just wanted to clarify that you're able to read these slides, because the letters are a little bit small. Okay, thank you. So here is the next slide, which is talking about the codified writings, because in our future webinars we are going to focus on the codified writings of Ayurveda. So I want you to get a flavor of how carefully and how rigorously these textbooks were compiled. Now, an Ayurvedic textbook does not mean one single format. An Ayurvedic textbook comes in multiple formats, and they are all called differently. So we have what is called as the Samhita, which are actually compendiums. These are like encyclopedias. They are textbooks that cover, a wide range of medical topics. They're not specialized in one branch. And these are the Samhitas. And then, apart from the Samhitas, we have also Nikandus, or medical lexicons. These deal with the drug nomenclature, their properties, and the tradition of medical lexicons has been extremely active, dynamic, and continuous over a long period of time in the evolution of Ayurvedic medicine. Then we have also very small handbooks called as sutras or aphorisms. So Ayurveda has always gone through a process of elaborating and concising. So there are textbooks which elaborates, and then they will be followed by textbooks which concise the information. And then we would have these dictionaries and lexicons which enable the readers to get more deeper knowledge of specialized subjects. We have books which serve as glossaries. And then we have elaborate commentaries on the classical textbooks, several commentaries on the same textbook. And these all throw deeper light into how these theories and you practice differently across different time periods. This is quite a fascinating journey to go through, Ayurvedic literature. And I want to also point out the richness and the scope of studying the classical texts. Some manuscriptologists made an estimate that out of the science textbooks, which includes medicine, out of the available textbooks, more than 90% have not been studied. So 90% of such textbooks are still not yet been read or even brought into the printed form. So you can imagine we are discussing Ayurveda with just 10% of the total available manuscripts in the country. Not to speak of all the manuscripts that we lost due to many reasons, including invasions, the flow of time, the break of tradition. So for many reasons, Then we have also formularies in Ayurveda. That's another type of textbook that you will find. These contain, the recipes, which are the Ayurvedic herbal formulations and other formulations, which are from these are the pharmacological kind of traditions of Ayurveda. So they've been preserved as formularies. And then we also have monographs. So these are some of the 7 major types of textbooks that you will see. And I want to tell you that the webinar that we have designed and developed, they are based on these textbooks, the major textbooks that have been already printed and are made available. So we are looking into Ayurveda from these authentic sources, which span a period of several thousands of years, which have been so painstakingly prepared, edited, revised, and updated by so many experts in the field over many thousands of years. So that is the legacy of Ayurveda. And in the next slide, I want to show, this is just an example of how rich this tradition was. That at every time period, you can see the map of India and how representative textbooks right from the Himalayan region in the north to Gujarat. Yes, but I want to point out that amongst the 10%, some of the major texts, luckily, are included. So, which means that we have, luckily, access to the major texts which discuss the basic principles. So what we have not access to are more texts that deal with applications of Ayurveda. So it's a good question. Out of these, we are dealing with only 10%, but the 10% is also valuable because textbooks like the Charaka Samhita are very much focused on the principle. But when we want to elaborate and apply Ayurveda like for example, if you want to practice Ayurveda in Russia or the United States or in a European country, you cannot just do it. Just take Ayurveda of India and just take it over there. It doesn't work that way. So it's very important to study the remaining literature, because even in India, Ayurveda is practiced differently in the south from the north because of climatic. Indian geography is quite diverse. There's very marked climatic and geographical differences. And because of these differences, Ayurveda has been practiced differently in different parts of the country. And these textbooks are witness to this wide application. So the 90% of the text give you the key of how to really apply the principles of Ayurveda. And maybe in the near future, we would, with the use of modern technology and more funding, we would be able to bring to light one day the remaining 90% of the Ayurvedic literature. Okay, so now here you can see that every part of the country participated in the development of Ayurveda. And if I were to put all the known textbooks on this map, then the map would disappear and you would only see the books, because it's that rich. I hope you're aware that India has one of the richest collections of manuscripts dealing not only with medicine but any other branch of human inquiry and learning. And here on the other side, you see the picture, the cross section of a tree. So I can just, oh, I'm sorry, I did not change the slide. I'm really sorry about this. So, yes, because I was not, something happened, this slide did not move. Are we able to see the, yes, I'm going to show the slide now. So before that, the codified writings. Can you see the slide now? The codified writing, so you can see the different types, the compendium, the medical lexicons, the aphorisms. Yes, so somehow I missed to, I thought the slide moved, but it had not moved. So yeah, it's showing now. And the next slide is the map. Yes. So this is the map that you asked for. So here you can see on the one side the map of India, and on the other side the tree with the annular rings. So this shows the development of Ayurveda both chronologically and geographically. And as I was telling, if I were to put all the textbooks above this map, then there would be no map. There would be only, books, and every part of India would be covered because every part of the country contributed to the development of Ayurvedic medicine. And through every time period, critical time period in the evolutionary history of Ayurveda. So uh, it was a pleasure for me to present the dynamic, evolving, and live tradition of Ayurveda, which always considered itself to be uh, developing what Ayurveda believes was universal medicine. Medicine that was not just for the people of India, but for the people of the whole world. And that is why sharing this knowledge to the entire global community is nothing but a continuation of the efforts that have been happening through the centuries. So the next slide, which I think would be the last slide in our first session, after which we may get about maybe less than 10 minutes for discussion. So what is the problem? And we looked at all the scope of Ayurveda, how it can play an active role in the integrative medicine movement, how it is based on biology, how it has got a very rich and dynamic evolving tradition, but there's still serious challenges to take Ayurveda forward. So, and these, one of the biggest challenges, Ayurveda has been reduced to the realm of wellness, and its full scope and potential is not being realized because it is dismissed as, just preventive and wellness medicine, wellness approaches, not even medicine. And there are several regulatory and legal hurdles which will have to be surmounted before Ayurveda can become a recognized system of healthcare. And for this reason, I think we need this will happen only if the true awareness of Ayurveda spreads. All those people who are learning Ayurveda and trying to practice this, it's really important that we get a very deep understanding of the science and learn how to validate the traditional way, how to present the authentic knowledge. And I think if this exercise is done systematically, then definitely we can overcome several of these regulatory and legal hurdles. And I want to just refer to one of our own experiences that we were able to get funding from National Institutes of Health and do a clinical trial which got accepted in one of the leading research journals from Europe. And when the results of a study was published and presented at the annual meeting of the American College of Rheumatology. So it's definitely possible if we move in the right way to overcome these regulatory and legal hurdles. But on the other hand, there is a little bit of fear also that I think this is, I like to leave it here. Will Ayurveda just get absorbed into modern medical system and lose its identity? Or will it be able to remain separate as an independent system of medicine? This is something which only time will say. It also depends on how we look at the futuristic healthcare. At least to me, I believe that the idea of one single medical system is too simplistic and too reductionistic to deal with the complexity of the human being. The human being is complex. Life is complex. We just cannot comprehend this with just one glass, through just one window. We need to look at human life through multiple approaches. So what we need is a matrix, a mosaic of approaches to healthcare. So I think the future of integrative medicine should be within a pluralistic healthcare framework where multiple approaches coexist. And in that sense, I think that we should look forward to a future where modern medicine, Ayurveda, and many other approaches to healing can maintain their individuality but still cooperate within an integrative framework to give a more better and complete understanding of the human being. So this, I think, is where we stop with the first, component of our webinar today. I presented before you the scope of Ayurveda from a contemporary perspective and concluded with a question: where will Ayurveda go? With so much potential, it all depends on how the people who learn and practice Ayurveda, how deeply we imbibe. Maybe we can create a pluralistic healthcare system in the future where multiple approaches to healing can find the right place and improve and better human health. So let me stop here, and the next few minutes that are available, maybe if you have a few questions, we could address that and then take a 10-minute break and then come back for the second part of our webinar today. Yes, I mean, if you say whether Ayurveda is legally accepted, the situation world over is not the same. There is acceptance in a limited way with a lot of restrictions and limitations. So in different countries, the rules are different. But on the whole, we have not reached a point where we can say that Ayurveda is accepted as a legitimate system of medicine. If you look at the National Institutes of Health and the WHO documents, there are some efforts to accommodate and accept systems of medicine like Ayurveda and try to study it more, but we are nowhere near legal acceptance. And also, I think that it's not legally accepted by the whole system, but certain individual practitioners at an individual level, sometimes there is more openness and acceptance. So I know of a lot of allopathic doctors, both in the US, Europe, and several other parts of the world, who are already, learning and practicing Ayurveda, who have given up practice of Western medicine and accepted Ayurveda. So I would say the individual levels, yes. So you mean this? Okay. So the principles of Ayurveda, we say, are derived from observation. Observation of nature, of life. In deep states of contemplation, deep states of interaction with nature, just like scientists discover new principles, the principle of gravity, for example, and then you have so many applications and theories around it. So Ayurveda was also discovered. The principles of Ayurveda were discovered over many centuries by different people. So I hope that answered your question. And I also want to point out that I don't want to say that everything is there in Ayurveda. Ayurveda never believed that can be an end to no medical system can claim to have the final word. So that's why I wanted to highlight that Ayurveda is evolving. But what is important is that framework, which is the most valuable contribution of Ayurveda, that holistic framework, the totality of understanding, which can be enriched by integrating with even modern knowledge. So that, I think, is the perspective. Okay, so I think then we are coming to the point of a short break of 10 minutes. Okay, thank you. Yeah, now I got it. So if there are no more questions, then I think it's time for a short break of about 10 minutes, and then we can come back. So if all are back. We can start. And actually the root word for Hridaya is Hrit. Hrit is almost the same as heart. So there's actually a lot more connection between Sanskrit and many other languages in the world than we may have imagined. So just one more confirmation that we are ready to go into the second module, which will actually be a discussion on the conceptual foundations of Ayurveda. And we'll have another 90 minutes. So are all ready? Okay, thank you. So we go to the next set of slides, and as you can see, this is dealing with the conceptual foundations of Ayurveda. And we begin from where we left. I want to now spend a few minutes discussing why evidence is not available for Ayurveda. And I would like to point out that this is because of a mixture of internal and external factors. Yes. So Ayurveda also believes that, the entire life comes from one single source, and so even the differences in languages, in our genetic diversity, racial diversity, geographical diversity, they can all be resolved when we find that central principle that connects everything together. And that is why Ayurveda prefer to call itself as Ayurveda, which is a universal terminology. And in our tradition, we never talked about India. It was always Loka, or the world. So I think there's no need to be frightened of Sanskrit. Once we begin to get familiar with terminologies, it will not, hopefully, look as difficult as we might think it to be. So there are many things that happen why Ayurveda, we don't have evidence to immediately overcome the regulatory and other legal hurdles. One of the things is rigidity and dogmatism. The long tradition of Ayurveda itself is in one way responsible for the lack of evidence. Ayurveda became dogmatic and rigid because it was in existence for a long period of time. And once something exists for a long period, it tends to become a little bit rigid. So that was one reason why over a period of time, when you're using things that have been tested several times over, people stop looking at it, and then that effort to create evidence is no longer functioning. There has been massive destruction that has happened during invasions into India. A lot of books have been burned, institutions have been destroyed due to both internal wars and external invasions. And then Ayurveda suffered a lot during the colonial period. So in 1835, when the first allopathic medical college was established in Kolkata, from that point onwards, the practice of Ayurveda was banned in the country. And so this led to a break in the tradition. A lot of knowledge that was being transmitted from teacher to student, it stopped at that point. And so even in the recent modern times, loss of Ayurvedic knowledge has unfortunately happened. So there are also other reasons why currently evidence is not available. As I was mentioning on the one hand, even our entire collection of textbooks have not been properly studied or presented. Very poor funding and support for research. Less than 4% of the total funds is available in India for promoting Ayurveda and other systems. And even very little is allocated for research. So when there's no funding for research, it's really very difficult to develop evidence. So there's very little training of research personnel. Publications in peer-reviewed journals are very limited. And also there are very few international collaborations for research. For these reasons, Ayurveda has not been able to present itself as a evidence-based system of medicine. And I also want to point out, like evidence, it would be wrong to say that there is absolutely no evidence in Ayurveda. When we talk today of evidence, we mean evidence in the form that modern science or allopathic medicine wants it, because it's structured using the principles of modern statistics, modern research designs. But the classical Ayurvedic texts themselves are very early attempts to codify evidence. So the real challenge is that we do have evidence in one sense, which are there in the text. These are all based on observations and studies and experiments. But the seeming lack of evidence is also because what is there in the tradition has not been presented in a way that is understandable and acceptable to the modern scientists. So what we really have before us is a challenge of translation, of translating traditional knowledge without losing its integrity in a form that is understandable and acceptable to the modern scientists and the legal authorities, because it matters, because these are the people who take decisions and who decide what will get accepted or not in society. So now we come to the conceptual foundations of Ayurveda. And I must warn that the conceptual foundations of Ayurveda is quite vast, and there are really so many things to discuss, and it would be really impossible in the span of the short time that we have in this webinar to cover everything. So as you can see from this slide, I am trying to summarize some of the core foundational theories on which Ayurveda is based. And we will discuss each one of them to some extent today, and in the future webinars, more technical aspects will also be considered and elaborated. So let me list them now one by one. So we have, first of all, that Ayurveda is nature-centered medicine. So what we mean by nature-centered medicine, we'll look into very shortly. But I wanted to emphasize this point, because today we are talking about person-centered medicine, personalized medicine. I want to say that Ayurveda is based on even a deeper philosophy, where even the human being is not the center of the universe. We are part of a much larger reality. And Ayurveda gives emphasis to nature as the pivot on which the whole manifestation emerges. And so Ayurvedic medicine is in that sense really nature-centered medicine first, and only then person-centered medicine. So yes, it is also person-centered medicine, but first nature-centered. So the second point is we will look at how Ayurveda becomes nature-centered and how Ayurveda also becomes person-centered, and both at the same time. And then we discussed this a little bit briefly already, that one of the greatest principles in Ayurveda is the integration of lifestyle, diet, and medicine. Not simply prescribing some lifestyle, diet, and medicine, but also looking at the relationship between the three, which I think is missing in the modern approach to lifestyle management. That lifestyle, diet, and medicine are interdependent. When you change lifestyle, you have to change diet and medicine. When you change diet, you have to change lifestyle. When you change medicine, you have to adjust the diet and lifestyle. So they are all mutually interrelated. So it's not just that Ayurveda emphasizes lifestyle, diet, and medicine, but also the way it helps teaches us how to harmonize these three is actually much more important. And then Ayurveda. It's a very important aspect of Ayurveda is that it is a mind-body medicine. That's another foundational principle of Ayurveda. And then we have the underlying the theory of Ayurveda is what we can call in modern language as systems approach to biology. Ayurveda is based on a theoretical framework which is very similar to systems approach. So there are Sanskrit terms for all this, but for the very reason of making this webinar more simple and easy to understand, especially the first few lectures, we may not be able to avoid Sanskrit terms altogether in the future webinars, but at least I thought if the foundational concepts are well understood first, then the Sanskrit terms can be better appreciated and imbibed. So here I'm not burdening you with any Sanskrit terms, but please give attention to the concept, because later these concepts will be linked to few terms which are needed for us to get deeper into Ayurveda. And then in Ayurveda are complex formulations from herbal, animal, and chemical sources. And this is a very foundational idea in Ayurveda that balance comes from combining, not from isolating. In fact, modern medical drug development follows the principle of fractionation, isolation, separating and taking out the active principle, targeting a single molecular mechanism, and then not really bothering about how it affects the total integrity of the system. Ayurveda is just the opposite. It says that we need to combine things and create a synergistic approach to pharmacology, and that we will also look at. This is another aspect of Ayurveda. And then we have preventive and predictive medicine. Ayurveda is personal, preventive, and predictive medicine. There are very novel and still relevant approaches to preventive medicine that are waiting to be discovered. And a deep study of the classical Ayurvedic texts as well as its practices can give us very good clues on how to develop this branch. And then finally, we have healthy aging. So I want to present in a nutshell, if you ask what is Ayurveda, what does it emphasize? I think if you just look at these points, these aspects, this sums up to some extent what is the flavor and the texture of Ayurveda. That it is nature-centered, it is person-centered, it integrates lifestyle, diet, and medicine in a very harmonious way. It emphasizes the connections between the body and the mind. It's based on all this is because it's based on a systems approach to biology. And also because of its systems approach to biology, it has a complex method of formulating herbal, animal, and chemical sources based on the principle of synergy rather than on isolation and fractionation. And it gives extreme importance to preventive and predictive medicine. And the ultimate prevention is actually, to be able to live a robust life when you are old. Ayurveda says that healthy aging is possible. You can age successfully. You can live in the last years of your life without cognitive decline. And in fact, Ayurveda says that you can die with awareness, you can die with a smile, living a complete life. It's so important to be able to not only live your life fully, but also to die peacefully and with awareness. So Ayurveda gives a complete approach to life and death and combines at this point philosophy, science, religion, spirituality, and many other subtle elements of the human thought process. Okay, so this is the framework that we're going to look at today, and we move forward. So the first point is that Ayurveda is nature-centered medicine. And what do I mean by this? So Ayurveda believes that there is a very deep connection between living beings and the nature around them. limitless. There are descriptions in the classical texts about how the universe emerged, and out of the universe how the non-living and then the living emerged. So this is part of the teaching of Sharira. This branch is called, so I'll just note that down. Sharira means the story of the evolution of the living body. Or we can say it's in Ayurveda we don't study anatomy, but we study the story of embodiment. You know, Sharira in Sanskrit means that which decays. So that is how the body is defined. That which decays. Whatever you do, it will decay and get destroyed. It comes out of the nature and it goes back into nature. And so Ayurveda says that we are created out of the universe, and there's a deep ecological connection, and ecology is very important. Ayurveda tells us to first of all find out what place we are living in and how we are connected to the external environment. And we say that for the people, so Ayurveda thinks globally. So I think this is a good slogan to say nature-centered medicine is to think globally and act locally. So this is in one sense summarizing one of the approaches in Ayurveda that comes from this nature-centered philosophy, that for people living in a particular locality, Ayurveda says the natural resources around them are the best suited. Like if you are living in Russia, you cannot always treat, you cannot, when you say development of Ayurveda, it does not mean taking all the Indian herbs to Russia or making all people in Russia or Europe or US to start eating Indian food and saying that this is Ayurveda. That's definitely not the Ayurvedic approach, because Ayurveda says that according to the climate, according to the geography, people develop different lifestyles. And it is, we cannot say that one is superior to the other. There are certain principles that we need to follow. But there are reasons why people develop certain lifestyles, preferences for certain foods. It's linked to the relationship between the individual and nature. And we have to validate whether these lifestyles are based on principles or on human will. So if it's on principles, then that's the way it has to be developed. So if somebody living in Russia or in very cold regions of Russia or even in less cold regions, they may need to develop very different lifestyles, very different types of medicines may have to be given. And so this is a big challenge also before us. I want to warn beforehand that all the medicines that are currently used in India, of course there are certain medicines which are universal, which will work anywhere. So Ayurveda says that it's a combination of some universal medicines with some really local medicines, which this is very diametrically opposite to the Western approach of globalization, where one pharmaceutical company would manufacture one medicine or discover, research, develop one medicine, and then apply it all over the world uh, and say that it should work on every human being on earth. But Ayurveda says that's not the way for drug development. That of course you can have some general medications, but you need to develop medicines also locally. What works in one region may not work in another. I did point out earlier that in India we already have this tradition, the tradition of Kerala. We use a lot of local herbs which are never used in other parts of India. So we have a lot of examples with which we can also try. So one of the challenges, if you want to introduce Ayurveda to the West, you need to start studying and evaluating the local plants, the local foods, the local lifestyle from the principles of Ayurveda. And then we can develop a real foundation for the future growth of Ayurveda. And that would be resting on this principle of nature-centered medicine. So as I was mentioning, not all natural resources, even lifestyle, diet, medications, have to be localized according to the geographical conditions and seasons. So I do not know in today's group how many are from which country? Do we have people outside Russia in today's group? Okay, okay, UK. Yes. So, right. So this is quite a global, network already. Oh, that's Africa. This is fantastic. So we are across. It's a transcontinental group, and so I think, yeah. Oh, fantastic, fantastic. Yes. So I think this is very crucial. I would at this point of time ask you to look into your own, herbal traditions, because Ayurveda says that there will be a herbal medical system in every place, and we say that that is already Ayurveda. So every country has its own Ayurveda. Sometimes their principles are well developed. Sometimes they are not developed, and that is the only difference. So it depends on how the people nurture this knowledge of Ayurveda. So in Africa, there is Ayurveda already. There is Ayurveda already. I'm sure even in the UK, there must have been. There is still the old traditions, the European traditions of herbal medicine, which according to Ayurveda is nothing but Ayurveda. Depends on how much effort was taken by the people of those places to develop its principles. The manifestation and its development may vary. So India took a lot of efforts to develop this innate knowledge and expand it. So that experience could be used to strengthen the traditions of medical practice, the traditional medical practice that are already existing in all these countries. So let me ask about, out of curiosity, uh, in the UK, is there still remnants of these old herbal traditions? Yes, so I think that should be the basis. So I'm going to repeat this question. Is it true for the Czech Republic that you also have some of these old herbal traditions? Yes. So the Netherlands also, I think so. Some of my colleagues are now also promoting Ayurveda in Netherlands, and I got the feeling that yes. And Africa, or I know that there are quite a rich flora. Nature is so diverse there, and definitely there are also such traditions. So this is our starting point. If we want to promote Ayurveda, I think the strength of Ayurveda in India has been that the foundational concepts, the theories and the principles, due to many historical, geographical, and other reasons, somehow in India that element got evolved and developed to a great extent at some point of time. So that is an advantage. If you take those principles and then look at our own traditions in each of the places where we are uh, living, then I think we will be able to sow the seeds for the development of Ayurveda. And the Middle East, I think the Unani tradition, the great Arabic traditions also contributed. From Arabia, the Unani system of medicine came to India, and with that, yes, yes. But still, if you look at it historically, there's been quite a long period in which a lot of knowledge, like Arabia, became a crucible for transmission of medical knowledge from different cultures to other parts of the world, and a lot of the knowledge of Greek medicine through Arabia also came to Ayurveda. So I think this global perspective, this idea of a nature-centered medicine, I think is very, very crucial. I just wanted to overemphasize this point because this is how I think Ayurveda should first and foremost be defined before we look into all the other dimensions like person-centeredness, like integrative, all the other theories. Let's not forget that first and foremost Ayurveda is nature-centered medicine, and that we will need to have different versions of Ayurveda, different geographical regions. Okay, so that is the first point, Ayurveda as nature-centered medicine. And then is the next most important point of Ayurveda being person-centered medicine. We will have an entire webinar on the person-centeredness of Ayurvedic medicine and how Ayurveda enables us to create a theoretical framework to design a lifestyle, diet, as well as medicine specific for each individual. So as I point out here, it's not just the treatment, even the lifestyle needs to be, customized for each individual. So also the diet. So what works on one person may not work on everyone. So this is also a challenge when we want to develop evidence for Ayurvedic medicines. The modern RCT or clinical trial design presupposes that if a medicine works in a small group of people, and however big the group is in a clinical trial, if you look at the whole human population, it's really very small. So we are going to test a medicine in a few thousand people and then presuppose that it will work on all the billions of people on earth. This is how modern drugs are developed. Whereas Ayurveda says that a medicine that works on the person next to you may not work on you because you are unique, your genome is unique, your exposure is unique and different, and so you need a very different way to treat. So this is the concept of person-centered medicine. So, and here we will come to a very important concept. I don't know how many of you have heard of this Ayurvedic concept of Prakriti. Anybody who has not heard the term Prakriti? I'm sorry, I need to ask a few questions in between to make sure, that I'm communicating effectively, and also to just gauge your prior knowledge of Ayurveda. Because Prakriti is such a now, a well-known, widely accepted concept. So, yes, some of you have not heard of it. So I think I need to explain it a little. Prakriti means the natural state. And in Ayurveda, it means the constitution. Like each person is continuously changing, but there's an unchanging pattern or a tendency behind all the changes that happen. Each individual behaves or responds to external stimuli and the external environment in a particular way, depending on the nature of his or her constitution. And that natural constitution, there are certain patterns, and people can actually, in principle, there are as many constitutions as there are people. So Ayurveda does not believe in putting people into boxes saying that you are this, you are that, and that's unfortunately the way in which Prakriti is interpreted today. That you would say this is Vata, this is Pitta, this is Kapha, and so you have people put into boxes. But Ayurvedic concept of Prakriti is out-of-box thinking. We say that each person is so unique that just like a fingerprint, each person has a unique imprint, and that is his constitution. But to simplify things, of course, we can think about categories. And so we have what is called as body constitution, physical constitution, in other words. And there are broadly 3 categories, which then get expanded into 7, and the 7 again expand into about 53, and you can still expand that, and it becomes innumerable. So it's like you have a very flexible classification system which you can expand and collapse according to the need of the situation and to the level of personalization that you have to go. So I will not dwell too much into the details of this constitution today, because in a later webinar we will look into that. But I want to tell you some of the interesting applications of this physical constitution that we understand that certain herbs will not be tolerated by certain constitutions. Certain foods will not be tolerated by certain constitutions. Certain people with certain constitutions will have susceptibility to certain specific diseases compared to others. So that's another reason. And there was a very interesting discussion once I had with a professor from the Johns Hopkins University from the US. He was an anesthesiologist, a professor of pain medicine, and he was very interested in the Ayurvedic concept of constitution. So what he said is that an anesthetist and a pain medicine expert finds it very difficult to decide what type of painkiller or what type of anesthesia a particular individual would respond to, and what is the type of dosing that is needed. He said from experience he knows that some people need less painkiller, some need more, some respond to certain types, and he has started a study to see whether the Ayurvedic concept of constitution can be used to customize and fine-tune the use of painkillers and anesthesia. So I want to point out that there are very interesting applications that we can think about from the Ayurvedic concept of constitution. We say that if a person has a Kapha constitution, he will tolerate pain more. If a person has Vata constitution, he's least tolerant of pain, and Pitta comes somewhere in the middle. And so if you know the person's constitution and the way they will respond to pain, then you can even customize and fine-tune the pain medication. So there are many such applications that we can think about when we think about person-centered medicine. And so this is the second important dimension of Ayurveda. From nature-centered medicine, we move to person-centered. And there is not just physical constitution, there is also mental constitution. That we say that people's minds also get, patterned in certain ways, and this also influences the way they behave. And the personality is actually a combination of both the mental and physical constitutions. The difference is that while the physical constitution cannot be changed, you can only manage your physical constitution. But your mental constitution is more pliable. Actually, through the process of learning, you can change your mind. And that is the message of Ayurveda, that you have to manage your body and transform your mind. And that is what the knowledge of constitution. And so you will be able to better understand why you are what you are and why you must follow a certain lifestyle. Why following that particular lifestyle you can become the most productive. There are other applications also of the Ayurvedic aspect of person-centered medicine, that it says how you can decide what type of people you work with, because certain constitutions have incompatibilities, how you can choose certain careers in your life. Your constitution will help you determine which skills or which vocations you would be most productive at. And so these are also incidentally other applications. So the scope of looking into the person-centered aspect of Ayurveda is quite vast. So this is the second point. So we just covered person-centered and nature-centered medicine. At this point, I just want to let you know that if you have any questions in between, which is very critical, otherwise we can have a discussion at the end. But if there's something which looks a little bit difficult to understand, please do let me know that we can clarify this before we go on to the next topic. So at this point, is everything clear? Can we move forward? Okay, thank you. So the next point that we are going to discuss is the integration of lifestyle, diet, and medicine. And I mentioned this several times already, that it's not just bringing lifestyle, diet, and medicine together, but the way we see how they are related to each other, and the emphasis that we give. Okay, this question: the physical constitution does not change; it remains as a tendency, but it can be managed by doing some compensatory actions. So physical constitution cannot be completely changed. It's just like your genetic makeup. I mean, it would be a bit complicated to meddle with your genes. Maybe there will be a technology in the future which enables you to even completely change your genomic makeup and even change your constitution. But Ayurveda says it's best to leave it alone because it's too dangerous to try and meddle with your genetic framework. It's much more harmonious and much more productive if you can learn how to manage it. So is that clear? On the other hand, your mental constitution is something which is more pliable. You can change your mental attitude. So that's a very positive approach in Ayurveda, that at the mental level, there's a lot of scope for change, adaptation, growth, and evolution. And that's also therapeutic, because we say education should actually be therapeutic and healing. The real education is that which enables us to understand ourselves so that we are able to contribute in a most productive way. And interestingly, one of the reasons Ayurveda says for sickness is that an inability to comprehend oneself. We say this is one of the major causes of illness. Yes, some people are more strong on pitta and weak on vata and kapha. And you can manage your pitta, but you may not be able to completely change it. So you can become a managed pitta, which means you will not impulsively behave like you when you are unaware. But by transforming your mind, you can have better control over your physical constitution. So that is the concept of mental and physical constitution. But it's very, very important. And Ayurveda believes that one of the major, yes, that is my belief. Yes, and Ayurveda says that one of the causes for illness is a lack of understanding of oneself. Like if you don't understand your constitution, if you don't understand your physical and mental constitution, you are always at war with yourself. Once you understand your constitution and learn to accept why you are what you are, and then you begin to discover your creative self. And Ayurveda says health means to be in oneself. So the Ayurvedic term for health is swastha. Swa means self, and stha means to stay or to be. So healthy means to be with oneself. And that comes only when you really understand yourself. And that's why person-centered medicine is so important in Ayurveda. And once you understand yourself, it's only from that point that you're really able to look into your lifestyle, diet, and medicine and make all the necessary changes that are needed to be able to express yourself in the most optimized and potential manner. So, as I mentioned, the lifestyle includes the behavior, and the behavior is both mental and physical. So what Ayurveda says is that if you try to change your physical without first dealing with the mental, then there will be a lot of resistance. So this is the sequence. Understand Um, Ayurveda is like a mirror. The knowledge of Ayurveda is designed to serve like a mirror. When you look at it, you see yourself. And when you see yourself, then you are able to understand much more clearly what should be done. And the starting point of changing, of transforming ourselves is to work with our own minds. We first start with our mind. When we change our mindset, so the whole process of healing starts with, your mindset. A mindset that understands the nature of oneself as well as the external environment. And without that understanding, it's very difficult to make big changes in your lifestyle, diet, or medicine. And when the mindset is changed, you can bring specific lifestyle behaviors which are most harmonious to your constitution. And once you set into a lifestyle behavior that is suited for a Pitta person. So the first question is, people will come and ask, I am so Pitta, what can I do? So the first step is to understand what it means to be a Pitta person. And then you get the mindset. And then you understand for a Pitta person what type of lifestyle is the best. And once you establish that lifestyle, then you can discover the right kind of food. And then if you do this very effectively, then probably you will not need medicine. Or you will need very less medicine. So Ayurveda says that today the development and evolution of Western medicine is really commendable and acceptable, but there's too much of dependence on medicine because we are missing this most important point, because we are not understanding our constitutions, because we are not modifying our lifestyles with the right mindset, because we are not adapting diet in accordance with our constitution and lifestyle. That is why we need more medicine. So we need more medicine. And more medicine means more unwanted effects. So this is a philosophical principle in Ayurveda. And the next part, as I was trying to point out, is that certain food items are good for certain lifestyles, and certain food items are not good for certain lifestyles, even according to the climate. Like, for example, in a cold climate, even alcohol and meat are helpful in moderation. If you live in a certain geography, wheat is recommended instead of rice. In some parts, people cannot tolerate wheat. There is wheat intolerance. Some people, this is dependent on many factors, on constitution, on geography. So diet is a very, very delicate thing. So Ayurveda gives very elaborate guidelines, discussions, thumb rules, and in our future webinars, we'll discuss some of these important principles. So this is the way of integration of lifestyle, diet, and medicine, which is a very important component of Ayurvedic treatment. So once again, we are moving from one point to the other. Let me pause for a moment and ask you if you have any questions. Yeah, it's a good question. I will come back to that later. There are certain mindsets. When your mind is very vulnerable, then your physical body will express very negative aspects of your personality. So we say that the mind has three modes. I will come back to this later. Please don't worry about the terms sattva, rajas, and tamas. These are three modes of the mind. So when you are transforming your mind from tamas to sattva, you gain control. Then your physical constitution expresses in a positive way. Because a pitta person can be very organized. A pitta person is like a king. So we say a vata person should be treated like a friend. A vata person is very anxious. He needs a lot of assurance. A pitta person is very demanding, aggressive. So depending on our mindset and on the way we have tempered our mind, pitta can manifest its aggression in a negative way or in a positive way. So pitta persons can be extremely good organizers. They can be, very good teachers, very good sharp intellectuals who can probe deep into the matter of things. So these are all the positive elements of pitta. So when I say managing pitta, there are two things. That first, that you let the positive expressions of your personality to come forth. And the second, of course, this happens because you are coming to terms with your own pitta. So it is you be adjusting to your own self through the mind, to your own constitution. And then that constitution expresses in a very positive way. So did I answer your question? Okay. So anyway, so I introduced three Sanskrit terms, Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, a little bit prematurely. But we are later going to describe it again, so please don't worry about those Sanskrit terms and what they mean. But maybe it's good to just hear those terms at this point. We will have a deeper and more detailed discussion later. So then we go to the next slide, which is about mind-body medicine. So Ayurveda says that this is the whole fulcrum, that the body and the mind are interconnected. And I want to tell you later how our systems theory of understanding the human body, it's not just based on anatomy and physiology, it's based on the mind-body axis, understanding of how the mind-body interactions take place. So this is a very interesting aspect of the Ayurvedic notion of the human body. We don't look at the body without the mind at the same time. So Ayurveda gives a very nice framework of the psychophysical person. And even our theories of the three doshas, have everybody heard about three doshas? Okay, anybody who has not heard of it? I guess there's no one. So that makes my... Okay, yes, it will take time to understand. So one, I'm trying to give you a little bit of understanding of what these doshas are. And I want to tell you that these are psychophysical entities. The doshas are concepts which link the body and mind together. So the doshas explain to you, it tells you, it gives you a conceptual framework to understand how the body influences the mind and how the mind influences the body. So vata is a psycho-physical plane. It has a psychological dimension. There is a psychological dimension as well as a physical dimension. As well as physical. So Vata represent at the mental plane anxiety, fear, sorrow, and at the physical plane, as you know, movement and sometimes restriction of movements or excessive movements and activity. So you can say that if at the physical level Vata increases, then there is a tendency also for Vata to influence the mind. So this enables us to actually manage the body and mind. What Ayurveda says is that through the mind we can manage the body, and through the body we can also manage the mind. So in mental illnesses, Ayurveda believes that treating the physical body first can help us to prepare the person better for, psychological treatment. Because a person who has excessive pitta in the system will be very aggressive, very angry. And if you try to go and counsel such a person, it will not work out. Or you may have to use a very strong psychiatric drug, and then the person will be lost forever. I mean, you're knocking him down with a very strong tropic drug. But what Ayurveda says is that you know that if you control pitta, then the aggression will come down. So by understanding what is the dosha basis behind a psychophysical expression, we will handle the dosha first, and then it becomes easier to handle the mind of the individual. So this is a very interesting element of Ayurveda, that most of its theories of how the body works have been mapped, connecting the continuum of the body and the mind. So this is a very important aspect of what we call as mind-body medicine in Ayurveda. So even if you look at every medicine that we take, Ayurveda talks about not just how it works in the body, but also how it works in the mind. And not just the medicine, even food. The food affects not just the body, but also the mind. So we say that by controlling or by regulating the quality of the food, you can also regulate the quality of your own mind. This is a very interesting concept. So Ayurveda says that if you want to control your mind, then you must also control your food. If you want to change the nature of your mind, then you need to also change the nature of your food. So this is all based on a very intricate understanding of how the mind and the body interact with each other. We say that even certain behaviors will actually influence the mind, and how certain thoughts can also actually influence the body. And I happened to read about several experiments which reminded me of many of the accounts in Ayurvedic texts, that even certain gestures, like even if you just, try to make a gesture of acting like you're angry, then the chemistry of your body changes. When your muscles twitch in a particular way, then the biochemistry of your body completely changes. And this influences the way your mind is predisposed. So this is a very foundational approach in Ayurvedic healing, and so a lot of spiritual, and this is one area where we take into account spiritual and religious factors and try to place them within the interaction of the mind and the body, and how to use the mind to bring about changes in the body. So meditation, mindfulness, yoga, and spiritual counseling, these are all potential areas where Ayurveda has rich experience and scope for new research. So this is a little bit about mind-body medicine, just a little bit of introduction. And once again, I want to point out that the Tridosha theory and even Ayurveda's understanding of food, of diet, of behavior, all these things are always looked at from the point of view of how it impacts both the body and the mind. So that's one more point. Are there any questions regarding the mind-body interactions? Okay. So then we go to the next few points. The next important aspect of Ayurveda is the systems biology approach. So, as I told you, Ayurveda is not focusing on single components of the body. Ayurveda does not want to break the human body into parts, but it wants to actually understand how all these parts work together in a very intelligent and organized manner. And that is why we can compare the Ayurvedic view or model of the human body in terms of the systems biology approach. So we talk about structure, property, and functional relationships, all the theoretical concepts. And I'm putting some of these Sanskrit words in bracket. I promised I will not use too many Sanskrit words in the initial discussions, but these are some few which we cannot avoid, but there are the English equivalents. I want you to appreciate, before we go into the next webinars, that all the theories of Ayurveda are talking about structure, property, and functional relationships, and energy matter transformations. So dravya guna karma, these you will keep hearing these terms later, and it's important for us to understand that what we mean by these terminologies are nothing but an appreciation and understanding the functional relationship between the structure and properties of substances that make up the human body. And the second thing is energy matter transformations, and how energy matter transformations in a network of structure and property and functional relationships actually create a dynamic self-balancing biological system. So the systems biology approach has nurtured the concept of self-healing in Ayurveda. That actually the body needs to be trained and supported to heal itself. We don't have to heal from the outside. So all Ayurvedic treatments is, if you correct the systems of the body, if you bring back these correct relationships, then the body can heal itself. This is a foundational theory and concept in Ayurveda, and all Ayurvedic healing is focused on this systems biology approach. So what we derive from this is the concept of the inner healer. The inner healer. We say that there is a physician in the body itself, and the goal of the external physician is to converse with and activate the doctor in the patient. And that's how the systems biology approach is applied in Ayurveda. So is that clear? Any questions regarding the, yes. So then we look at the next concept. This is actually a very interesting aspect of Ayurveda. How complex formulations are developed from herbal, animal, and mineral sources. I did mention earlier that in modern medicine we move from a plant or a natural source and break it down to fractionate them and get an active principle. It could be a single alkaloid. And then we need to find a single molecular mechanism or a target. So modern medicine goes through what is called the magic bullet approach. You find a single molecule and then a single target, and when you give this, it hits the target, brings about a molecular change, and then the disease is cured. But Ayurveda says that the body is not so simple, that is very complex. As you realize that we have this idea of the systems view of the body. It's a network of relationships, of structures and properties. You need to make sure that you are always balancing. What you do in one place should not affect the integrity of the other. And so for that reason, all Ayurvedic formulations are combinations. And Ayurveda discovered the benefit of many such combinations. And I can tell you we are still not understood completely this complexity, but a few examples I would like to mention. I don't know I'm sure you must have heard of turmeric, curcuma. Yes? And in turmeric, it's a very, oh, you do not know turmeric? Yes. So turmeric is a spice. It is called as yellow gold. It's very good for the skin. It's an antiseptic. It's an anti-inflammatory agent. And there are many, many interesting. So it's actually a herb. And we use the rhizome, which is part of its root. It's got a deep yellow color. And it improves the complexion of the skin. So these are some general things of skin. So I just want to give an example of how Ayurveda understood the concept of synergy, of why we need to mix herbs and medicines together to get a complete effect. So in turmeric is a chemical called as curcumin. This is very, very active, and this curcumin actually is responsible. There are also many, many other compounds in turmeric, but one of them is curcumin. And it has got an anti-inflammatory effect. If you take turmeric regularly, you can even prevent cancer. Yes, it is added to rice. It is used in vegetables. And in India, according to one of the cancer centers in US, turmeric could have played a very important role in preventing the incidence of cancer in India. But what is interesting is that curcumin has very poor bioavailability. Like even if you take, yes, and even if you take a lot of curcumin inside, it will not get absorbed. Most of it will be excreted from your body. So very poor bioavailability. So if you want turmeric to really produce good results, you will have to eat kilos of turmeric, and this is not possible. So in Ayurveda, we discovered that black pepper, does everybody know about black pepper? If you add, no, not long pepper, but long pepper is also good. You can also use long pepper. So either black pepper or long pepper. If you add a little black pepper to turmeric, then the bioavailability of curcumin is increased 2,000 times. Which means by adding a little pepper, suddenly turmeric becomes available to the body and it produces. So this is the knowledge of Ayurveda. A lot of people use turmeric. A lot of people use it. But Ayurveda knew that turmeric is useless without pepper. So this is the beauty of the Ayurvedic concept of drug combinations. I just wanted to give one example. Another interesting example is iron. The Ayurveda recognized that the blood needs iron. And excuse me. And iron is sometimes not so well absorbed either. Iron is not so well absorbed. So Ayurveda discovered that the plant called gooseberry, it's known as amalaki in Sanskrit or amla. I don't know how many of you have heard of this. This is gooseberry. It's a very important herb in Ayurveda, a fruit. And if you take iron along with amalaki, then it's absorbed much better. Some of these medicines can even help modern medication. Some of the principles of drug combinations can make even modern medicine better, because there is a drug called phenytoin used for epilepsy. It's very toxic. If you add an Ayurvedic herb, so it's an Ayurvedic herb, and it's widely found in India in the Himalayan regions. And this is a study. We found that if you add amla, then iron is absorbed much better. And I was talking about another modern medicine. So I said that it's not only for Ayurveda, but this combination can help even modern medicine. Phenytoin is a chemical that is used for epilepsy, and it's very toxic. But in severe cases of epilepsy, we have to use phenytoin. Has to be used in large doses. There is a Ayurvedic herb called Vitex negundo. So if you add this herb to that phenytoin, then you can reduce the effective dosage by more than a half. Effective dosage can be reduced of this medicine. So you can see how, and when you reduce the dose by more than half, toxicity comes down. So this is what I wanted to highlight through this idea of complex formulations, that Ayurveda offers a totally new pathway, a new door for pharmacology. So this is how Ayurveda gives you a science of combining herbs, animal and mineral sources, and creating newer ways of how the drugs interact with the human body, creating more balance. And in Ayurveda, we also have targeting. Targeting means the same herb you can make to work in different parts of the body. So we can make one drug work on the brain, you can make it work on the kidney or on the prostate or on the liver by using certain other herbs which will carry that medicine to that particular organ. This is called as targeting. So these are all methods in which Ayurveda has developed complex formulations. And so we can say, in Ayurveda, gives us a new possibility, a new age of pharmacogenomics with individualized prescriptions. And, a shift from molecules to molecular cocktails. So in one way, if you use the modern scientific language to explain what is Ayurveda, we can say that Ayurvedic pharmacology is all about molecular cocktails. And it's a science of molecular combinatorics. Yes, I just typed these words because they may sound a little bit technical, and so maybe it's more useful if you can read it after I also type it. And so this is the There's a new branch in modern medicine and modern science coming, which is called as network pharmacology, or and this is exactly what is described in the Ayurvedic text. So there's now emerging a platform in which we can probably bring Ayurveda and these newer ideas in modern pharmacology, network pharmacology, which is now focusing on multiple targets, on drug interactions. And I think then we can explore and apply this in a much more sophisticated manner. So that's about complex formulations. We'll go on to the next point. It's about predictive and preventive medicine. So, as I said, Ayurveda has laid great emphasis on predicting and preventing diseases based on the understanding of constitution. And modern advancements in genetics and traditional knowledge of Ayurveda can offer a promising area for collaborative research. And when it comes to preventive medicine, especially prevention of dangerous illnesses like cancer, diabetes, the cardiac diseases, heart attack, myocardial infarction, and such other diseases. The Ayurvedic method of Panchakarma, or bio-cleansing, is a very unique preventive intervention. And it can not only neutralize and get rid of metabolic wastes that can disturb the functions of the body. So if we apply Panchakarma, I think is one very preventive intervention in Ayurveda, in which we can keep the internal environment stress-free and prevent occurrence of diseases like cancer and heart disease, diabetes, which are increasing the healthcare burden world over, the chronic, what you call as the NCDs, or the non-communicable diseases. I'm afraid Panchakarma cannot be taught over a webinar. It needs hands-on training. But you can definitely get an understanding of what is Panchakarma and where you can do it, and how to distinguish between what is a genuine program in Panchakarma and what is not. But it will be too ambitious to try and do Panchakarma just by attending a webinar. This is just an introduction, telling you the purpose of this webinar is basically to give an outline of the scope of Ayurveda and how it functions, how it works, how to distinguish between what is genuine and what is not genuine. Yes. So this is about predictive and preventive medicine, and then we have finally healthy aging. So this is such a specialized branch of Ayurveda. We say that while old age cannot be avoided, we can definitely make people healthier when they are old. And I think this is of great relevance today, because the aged population world over is really on the rise, and there are also old age illnesses like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, dementia, and certain other diseases, plus osteoarthritis. And that's how old age can be a very frightening prospect for most of us. I mean, something that we dread. But Ayurveda says that old age is something that you must look forward to. It can be the best part of your life, because when you age successfully, you can look back at life with satisfaction. Ayurveda says that there are ways, even though your body may shrink and shrivel up, you can preserve your muscles, joint function at the physical level, maintain your circulation, and then also preserve your higher mental functions. And later we will discuss some controversies. Recently, I read in the NIH website that in the bid to save us from heart attacks, we are reducing oil intake and cholesterol levels to such an extent that it is damaging our brains. There are FDA warnings that if you take too much of statins, you might get damage to your brain. There was actually one study which also showed how people with higher cholesterol had less chances of getting dementia, because your brain is just 2% of your body, but 25% of the cholesterol in your body is in the brain. So Ayurveda has specific strategies which are organ specific, which we call as marmas, or the vital organs. So success to healthy aging is also based on, specific regimens which are aimed to protect your vital organs. So it's when you age, when you get into your old age, you have to reach there with the robust, well-functioning vital organs. And Ayurveda gives you a method of rejuvenative treatment which will enable you to preserve your vital organs in good condition when you are aging. So I want to point out some studies have already happened in recent times in India which show that some of our Ayurvedic formulations are able to prevent DNA damage. This has been experimentally proven for the first time. And amalaki, which I mentioned a little while ago, is one of the ingredients of some of these formulations. So this amalaki is able to, prevent DNA damage, but not reverse once it has happened. So which means it's definitely got a preventive action. So with less DNA damage, there's less chance of, carcinogenesis and several other diseases. And there's many, many mechanisms which we can hope to in the future unravel and get better understanding of how we can age successfully. That's another area where Ayurveda can make a lot of contributions. So to come to the final parts, I would like to now come to our last few slides, and by emphasizing that again that Ayurveda has a rational approach. And we say that the knowledge of Ayurveda is not dependent on the statement of a person. It's dependent on actual observations. I think some of you asked earlier how Ayurveda derives this principle. So here it is explained. How are these principles discovered? How is the knowledge of Ayurveda developed? It's not developed because of one person. It's developed because of objective observations. The theoretical constructs of Ayurveda, the texts say, have been derived through a process of discussion and consensus. A lot of experts have sat together, debated, argued, experimented, and based on their experience, they have arrived at some conclusions which are called as siddhantas, means which has been adequately explored. So it doesn't come just out of the blue. The core teachings of Ayurveda are verified by experts. There's a verbal testimony. And this can be challenged and re-verified again by direct observation and inference. So Ayurvedic knowledge system is robust, from this viewpoint. So I also want to once again re-emphasize that Ayurveda gives you, like Ayurvedic texts, I want to tell you the knowledge that we are discussing today has come through such processes of validation. One of our earlier textbooks, Charak Samhita, says that clinical outcomes must be validated to distinguish between chance effect and real effect. Just imagine 3,000 years ago, physicians were discussing when a treatment gave a result, was it real effect or a chance effect? I mean, this means that they were thinking very similarly like statisticians today do, to really establish a causal relationship, a connection between the treatment, the intervention, and the outcomes. So Ayurvedic texts talk about self-limiting diseases. We say that there are certain diseases which will get cured even if you do not treat them. The texts discuss about placebo effects, spontaneous remission. And we say that we must look at causality and causal relationships. There are ideas, statistical ideas. If some of you are not so familiar with statistics, you can not take this too seriously. But I just wanted to say that there were also some methods of validation in the tradition of Ayurveda. We have descriptions of concepts like sensitivity, specificity, How specific is your test to diagnose a disease? How sensitive is your medicine to produce a result? These were all discussed in the texts. There's also the model of a clinical trial, where a trial intervention, paksha we call it, has to be tested with a positive and negative control. So we see, therefore, I would like to conclude. We have just a few minutes left before we have to conclude anyway. That what we have arrived at today is that there's quite a bit of knowledge in the classical tradition of Ayurveda. They are hidden because of language, because of lack of uh, access to some of the traditional material, and the finger is pointed most of the time to Ayurveda, not because of negative evidence, but because of lack of evidence. And sometimes due to commercialization, we are also seeing negative evidence emerging. But I think the task before us is to understand Ayurveda, first of all, by accessing the original sources, by interacting with people who have the knowledge of the genuine applications, and then translating it into a form that is understandable and acceptable to modern society and to the modern scientists. And I think if we do this, then we can break open these hurdles, the bottlenecks that prevents Ayurveda from really becoming a global science. So I think with such a global audience, a transcontinental, outlook, if we acquire the knowledge of Ayurveda and use the modern developments, I think we can revive the older traditions which are there in seed form in every part of the globe, and once again enrich our healthcare system with one more dynamic, holistic, and integrative approach to healing. So this is the brief introduction that I wanted to give today, which is an introduction to the entire webinar series of lectures that we will be going through in the future days, in the coming days, and also a general introduction to Ayurveda. So I think I will sign off here, and we have 5 minutes if you have any questions. Otherwise, we can continue. So we do end with the camera. So good evening, and whatever else it is in other parts of the world. So we will sign off here.